Hello, folks. Welcome and thank you for joining us. We're recording this. We're recording this session. So if you have colleagues or friends who didn't get to see it, who would like to see it, it will be available, I would say, within a week, both on the shOUT website, which is shoutcoalition.org. and at RISE's website, which is risehfl.org. So this is a new experience for us. So please give us some grace as we're figuring things out. We're hoping to have more roundtables, including roundtables with older youth, with guardians, and with medical and mental health care providers around similar topics. So if you have any suggestions for folks that you could throw under the bus, we are always open for that. And you can reach us through the contact form at the shOUT Coalition website. And I would love to go ahead and get started. This is putting you on the spot, Josh, but would you be willing to give us a brief summary of what the shOUT Coalition is and has done so far?
Sure.
Awesome.
I will say it's very nice to see some of y'all. So the shOUT Coalition, which stands for Sexual Health Outreach Coalition, is a collective impact or a group of people from different organizations that are working together in Northeast Tennessee and Southwest Virginia, or the Appalachian Highlands broadly, to try to move forward a conversation about sexual health, particularly focused on young people. So not only move the conversation forward, but also to talk about what does a sexually healthy community look like in the Appalachian Highlands, and how do we get there? What's the education we need, and what is the work that we need to do together? We've been at this officially for like a year and a half, but 2.5 years ago, we started the conversation. And we had a summit back in May where we brought together different youth workers, youth advocates, and other mental and social health professionals to talk about creating a environment and a space in which young people can thrive. And while shOUT has a lot to do with sexual health, really what we want to see is young people healthy and thriving. And that's beyond just sexual health, because we know sexuality is bigger than just sex, right? It has to do with who we are as people, how we operate in the world, how we're treated, how we identify. And so we're hoping to bring everybody together to sort of transform and change systems to better meet the overall health needs of young people.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Josh. All right. So we'd like to make a little space at the beginning so that folks can pop into the chat, or we could ask folks to unmute, but I'd love to have a record of it that we can send out after the meeting. So if you have any organizational events or classes, workshops coming up that you'd like to share, or if you know about workshops that would be useful for this population of service providers, please go ahead and pop it in the chat. And I'm putting in from Rise Healthy for Life our fall programming. All right. So while everyone is doing that, I'd like to introduce our panelists today. We have Reverend Tiffany Anderson Sapp from the Unitarian Universalist Church in Gray. Tiffany, do you want to unmute and say anything?
Thank you so much for having me. Just a little bit about me. I've been the minister at Holston Valley UU in Gray for the last 2 years, and it's an amazing community there. And this work is connected with the values of my church. So I'm really happy to be here with you all talking about these things.
Thanks so much, Tiffany. Brian, would you like to go? Reverend Brian?
I'm in Harrisonburg, Virginia, just northwest of Charlottesville. Been here about 13 years, originally from North Carolina, family from East Tennessee. So I appreciate the regional representation here, and been a pastor at Shalom Mennonite Congregation of Harrisonburg, part of Mennonite Church USA, for almost 10 years. And just glad to be here and participate in the conversation.
Excellent. Thanks so much. And Jessie, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, so I'm Jessie Birkeland. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm one of the other collaborating directors of Rise Healthy for Life. We provide responsible, inclusive sexuality education for people of all ages throughout the Tri-Cities area.
Excellent. All right. So the first thing that I'm going to do is play a video from amaze.org, assuming that I can find it. Okay, let's.
You guys won't believe what I did this past weekend. I went to a dog butt concert at the Civic Center, and then I had 8.5 hot dogs, and then I got sick.
Pardon. Can you all hear the audio? Okay, good.
It was so awesome.
Those guys rock. I was busy working on my science fair project all weekend.
Cool. How about you, Joanne?
I got a purity ring at a purity ceremony at my church.
Sweet. Wait, what's a purity ring?
Basically, it means that I promised to wait to have sex until I'm married.
So it's like part of your religion?
Yep, it's a symbol of my decision to wait to have sex until I'm married. It's what my religion teaches is the right thing to do. People's attitudes about life are often guided by religious beliefs or based in family or cultural tradition, which help them make important decisions, including decisions about dating and sex.
But what if people don't agree with each other because their beliefs are different?
Different beliefs don't make one person right or another person wrong. It just makes them different, and that's okay. These beliefs can help people understand complex topics, like whether and when to have sex, how to act based on gender, the use of birth control, and what to do if you get pregnant by mistake, in a way that works for them personally. And people with the same faith or culture often have different thoughts on these same issues. For example, some people believe that all sexual experiences should only happen between two people who are married. Others think it's okay for boys to have sex before marriage, but not for girls. And others think that it's okay for people to have sex as long as they really care about each other. And people's beliefs can influence attitudes about gender and gender roles too. Some may believe that men are meant to be providers of the household, while women should be the main ones to take care of the children. Others believe that raising kids should be divided equally among the adults in the family.
I know what you mean. A few days ago, my mom and my uncle were having a serious discussion about abortion. They both had really different views.
Right. Some people believe that a God or higher power is the giver of life. So therefore, abortion is a procedure that ends life. And others feel that only people who are pregnant have the right to choose what happens to their body, no matter what. Plus, some people may choose to follow practices they were taught as a kid, while others may find their beliefs change as they get older and are exposed to different things. In the end, you have the right to your religious and cultural beliefs, even if others do not agree with them. And remember, it's important to respect others' beliefs and not judge them as long as they are not harmful to themselves or others.
I guess having different religions and cultural beliefs about life makes us all unique, much like the members of Dog Butt, though one can only dream of being as cool as them. Rock, 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 bow, wow, wow.
Oh,
Rock, 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 dogs are nice.
Dogs are nice.
All right. So, sorry. Still
Dr.
going.
Christopher West here, theology.
Was still going. All right. So we're gonna start by sharing some group agreements. These are group agreements that the participants have agreed to, and we would like also to get an indication from the other folks here today that they agree to abide by these agreements as well. Okay, can you all see this? My stuff is in the way and I can't, there we go. Okay, so our group agreement says that one person will speak at a time, that we will lean in and lean out, which means that folks who might have a tendency to not say much, please step up and say something, because what you have to say or contribute is important. And remember to lean out to make space for other folks with different opinions and different ideas. It's important to use I language. And so we don't say everybody knows this thing, because everybody doesn't necessarily know. We can only speak from our own experience. Come ready to learn, not to know, and please be kind and respectful. So if you would indicate with the thumbs up emoji that you agree, that would be wonderful. Awesome. Thank you. Okay, awesome. All right. So I will stop sharing. And I'm going to go with a statement that surprised me that I think will be interesting to you all, which is that a national survey done in 2017 found that more than 93% of parents across the political spectrum think that sex ed is important in middle and high school. And 78% of parents across the political spectrum support better sex ed. And that is not what I expected, but it made me really happy. Like, my job is done. So I wanted to just start with that information, and then the discussion will take us wherever it takes us. So I'm going to start with, for our two clergy members, what does your faith say about sex, sexuality, and sex ed? And I'm going to start with Reverend Tiffany, if that's okay.
Well, I'll tell you, it's pretty important to us to make sure that we do sexuality education right. We are part in the Unitarian Universalist Church. We are part of a religious education program called OWL, Our Whole Lives, which is a comprehensive sexuality education program. We do it in partnership with UCC, United Churches of Christ. And the whole goal is to provide age-appropriate sexuality education throughout the ages. So our church is looking at starting a kindergarten through second grade class for this pretty soon here. And what in the world would you teach kindergarten about sex ed? Well, you teach them things like their body parts and how people aren't allowed to touch them, and how important consent is and stuff like that. So it's like we can start early by not making it this weird stigmatized thing. And perhaps in the process, kids won't end up so ashamed of their bodies. You know, I had pretty open-minded parents, but yet just the instinct to like withdraw from those conversations accidentally created a lot of shame in me that I had to get over, even though I was being raised in a relatively open-minded setting. So my religious path embraces the opportunity to learn about these things, because we believe that these physical aspects of the human experience are a really important part of being human, not something that we should separate out from our spirituality.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Great. Brian, would you like to take a stab at this?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I think I'm thrilled that Tiffany's tradition and the UUs together with the UCC have a curriculum or some kind of framework for congregations to draw from. The Mennonite Church USA is largely congregational, although we have conferences and a denominational office and a publisher, but we don't have any framework for sexual education for that we can just say, here's the resource. In fact, one of my colleagues was trying to sign up for the OWL training herself because we're just sort of desperate for it. We do have training for sexual abuse prevention for churches, and that's been a recent, really positive development that doesn't come primarily from within our own tradition, but has been sort of a collaboration with some others. So we have a safe congregations policy, and really, compared to 20 or even 10 years ago, is much more robust than it ever was. And so I think we're seeing a transition toward more and more openness, more and more communication, and speaking about sex and bodies, which 20 years and plus ago, it just wasn't talked about. And the messages given were primarily negative, don't do this, don't do that, but not so much like, who are you? How did God make you? God made you and called you good. So things are shifting. In my particular congregation, we have a lot of people who are in education around bodies, nurse midwives, nurse educators, people like Mr. Diamond there who do this kind of work. So we're unusual, I think, in that we really want to send positive messages, but we're also still struggling to figure out how to do that especially with the youngest. I'll add one more thing. Our sexual abuse prevention program does have a curriculum for elementary, middle, and high school students for something similar to what Tiffany said about it's called Circles of Grace, and it's about age-appropriate learning in terms of boundaries for yourself and your body, but doesn't put the onus on the children or the youth for their own safety.
That's beautiful. Thank you. And do you know what the name of the program that you all use for sexual abuse prevention is?
I believe our trainings were first created by Safe Church.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's maybe out of Pennsylvania somewhere. But we went through a Safe Church training process and certification process, and that is something we revisit annually.
Great, thank you. I'll try to find it and put it in the notes that we follow up with. Thanks so much.
I can do that too. Put in the
Excellent.
chat.
Thank you. And then I realized that I forgot to say, for now, participants are not able to unmute, but if you have a question or a comment, please feel free to put it in the chat, and Caitlin will let us know periodically if there's something that we need to share. Okay. Okay. So I have a personal question, since we have the folks that we have here, that came out based on y'all's answers, if that's okay. What are your thoughts about sex ed in church versus sex ed in school versus sex ed in the community? And since Jessie hasn't gotten to go yet, I'd like to start with her, if that is okay with you, Jessie.
Yeah. I think that they shouldn't be totally different. I think they should all empower people's autonomy and choices and boundaries that they set for themselves. And if they can all work on that framework and use positivity as the approach and empower people to make their own decisions and learn about their bodies and be curious and interested, know that, understand the diversity of human beings, they could all really align. They don't have to be tailored for certain populations. So that's where I'm at.
Thanks. And do you think that any place is more appropriate for sex ed than any other place?
No. I think it should just be a normal conversation. It's so taboo, and it shouldn't be, because it is a huge part of people's lives. It's about relationships and bodies. It's not just about intercourse. Sexuality is so much more than just the act of sex. It's how to be a good friend. It's how to communicate. It's consenting and listening. And it's, if those parts, I almost wish it wasn't called sex ed, because that would take a lot of that shock out of it. But that's where we're at.
Okay, Tiffany or Brian, either of you, would you like to weigh in on this? Sex ed in school versus community versus church?
Well, I'm kind of with Jessie here, which is probably not shocking to me. That I think that it needs to be in schools and it needs to be in the community. Maybe it would be slightly more conservative in schools than you might find in a liberal community like mine. But I think that we've kind of already learned that abstinence only approaches aren't effective. And, you know, my religious faith calls me to be concerned about the whole world, not just my little corner of it. And so that means that my faith makes me want, you know, all kids to learn some important basics about what their bodies are, how they work, that they, you know, shouldn't be afraid to talk about these things.
Thanks. Brian?
Yes, the people in my community, I think, would agree with me that it belongs in all those places. You know, and recognizing that there are different elements of it that are appropriate for those places, or different contexts, different communities that provide, you know, an important kind of angle on how what we do with our bodies interacts with the communities in which we're a part, you know, and that's the thing that I think from the church perspective that I'm a part of is a real opportunity, is to, a lot of this sort of, I had sort of traditional sex ed in high school, maybe middle school, in a public school in North Carolina. And then, like, it's what I learned in civic groups and in the locker room and on buses and, you know, talking to people. And at church, we just didn't talk about it except don't do it, you know. And yet, so it wasn't until my wife was getting ready to have our first child that we did a comprehensive, you know, what I think of as like that sex education should have been like, where I learned all kinds of things that I never knew about how bodies work and why they work the way they do. And I came away, and of course I was in my 30s at that point, but yeah, I just needed a community where it was okay to talk in a group about all of the things, and I didn't have that. So in my church, we've had a few rounds of parents who have initiated something with teens who are, or young children who are moving from into teenage years, or kind of a coming of age conversation with some adults and a few, and the youth that are at a certain age. And we just had to kind of create it ourselves. But I think that's really significant for them to know that there's no part of their life or their community where they can't bring all of themselves.
Excellent, thank you. And Caitlin, I wanted to ask, are there any comments or questions in the chat that we want to bring up at this point?
We just got one from Tammy Alls. It says, I think youth need to hear this information from all areas of their life. So one way or another, they're finding safe spaces to be open about what they want and need to know. I also agree that life skills and character education in general tie in with sex ed curriculums. Our schools need to get updated curriculums. Our community agencies and churches need programs that can fit their needs and people who are trained / comfortable with this type of education.
Excellent. Thank you, Tammy. And thank you, Caitlin.
Can I pop back in?
Yeah, go for it.
Thank you. I think if sex ed is done really well, it doesn't have to be tailored for a certain population, because then you're kind of segregating people and being like, well, these type of people need this type of sex ed and these type of people need this sex ed. But really, we all have bodies. We all understand that the characteristics of a healthy relationship are the same across the board. And I don't think it has to be much different for different people.
Can I
Thank you.
piggyback off of Jessie?
Go for it.
I love this idea, because the truth is that broad approach of this can fit everyone at once then leads to conversations about how do we make decisions whether to abstain or to engage, and how does our faith affect those decisions. And so those very broad questions then allow the individual paths that might be represented there to actually be explored and honored in a way that says, I don't need to, have a Catholic version of this and a Pentecostal version of this, but instead we just approach it with broad, open-ended questions that say, when you're making these decisions about these things, your faith is going to inform it. What does your faith say about this? And I believe the OWL program even has some supplements based around exactly that. So the OWL program itself is very broad, but then you can get supplements where it's about talking about your specific faith tradition and what it may say about these things. So I love that idea, Jessie.
Thank you. Did you have anything else to add, Brian, before I move on?
Oh, I'm still working out my response, but I was thinking, theologically, I probably inherited what I think of as maybe like a Garden of Eden version of sex from a faith perspective, which is that it was all good until it wasn't, and then we felt like we needed to hide some part of ourself. And there's a new theology. What I would love to see my children develop is a sense that they don't need to hide, that they're, because if shame is part of what we're teaching in faith settings, then people, I think what's lost for a faith community is a sense of connection between what we do with our bodies and the availability of a God or a sacred being who is with us all the time, no matter what we do with them and however we're feeling. We feel like we have to divorce ourselves from that sacred presence. So that's my hope, is that we can, as a church, can articulate a theology that is, that doesn't require that hiding.
Thank you. So, we have some other questions, and I'm gonna start with asking Jessie, and she will be able to answer for Tennessee. We weren't able to get a sex ed expert in Virginia. I don't know if Josh would be willing to jump in with his knowledge or not. He's usually able to jump in, but I would love to ask for Jessie at least, what do kids in public schools actually learn in sex ed?
I'm pretty sure family life education doesn't start until about middle school, maybe 5th grade, and they separate genders. So girls learn about menstruation and boys learn about body odor and erections, maybe. I'm not really sure. But separating them doesn't allow them to learn about other bodies besides their own. And they might have to talk to different genders about their body with medical professionals one day. And they might have partners who are different genders one day. You have to be comfortable with your body and talking about it and understanding it with other people who don't have this, even within genders. All the bodies are different. And then as they get older, they go through more abstinent focused or risk avoidance. So I think starting, like leading with the negative, like avoiding risk, is already setting it up to just be like this negative thing. This sex is bad, and here are all the bad things that are going to happen if you do it, instead of building a foundation of positive outlooks about sexuality and bodies and relationships that you can build upon and be like, here are all the things that you need to know for when you want to have sex. So the question is, what do they learn? And the answer is not enough.
Josh, are you willing to hop in? I'm putting you on the spot, I know.
Sure. So Virginia has a standard of learning, which includes does not include. I guess Virginia statewide have what's called SOLs, or standards of learning, that are based off of exams, and these are across subject areas. And they have family life education standards of learning, which are fairly broad, but they do include that they're supposed to be medically accurate, and the education should be medically accurate and evidence-based or evidence-informed, but they do not dictate a particular curriculum. Generally speaking, some kind of, similar to what Jessie said, some kind of sort of like body-based anatomy and physiology that's separated by, I'll say separated by sexes, not so much by gender, because it doesn't necessarily matter how you feel in your body, but starts in 5th grade. Now in Virginia, the Virginia Department of Health typically gets funding from the Virginia Department of Education to do sex ed, but they will only fund what is called sexual risk avoidance education, which used to be that's kind of new language for abstinence only or abstinence based, whereby the focus is how do we get kids to avoid the risks associated with sex and sexuality. That's what they'll fund. However, school districts, sexual health education is decided by school district in Virginia. So Tennessee, it's the state says this is what you can't do and what you can do. And it doesn't really, there's less wiggle room per district. Whereas in Virginia, it's your school district can pretty much teach whatever it wants to teach if it is voted on by your school board. And so the school boards have to empower every school district and approve sexuality education, which has to go through a specific process where any program is vetted by these like health advisory boards, which are supposed to be comprised of community members. A lot of those boards don't really exist, and a lot of people don't necessarily go through all that, and some people don't even know exactly what the process is. And so what you have in Virginia then is a smorgasbord of sexual health curriculum from that are supposed to meet standards, but those standards are not tested on and they're not really evaluated. It's not like there's a sex ed statewide guy or person who's going to each level and going, hey, what are you doing? And how does it meet the standard? They don't really do that. They're just like, here's the standards, do what you can do. And so there's not a statewide curriculum there's just some kind of vaguish guidance that has to include trafficking. But so you can have for some school districts that are teaching what people call comprehensive, which means it's comprehensive of sexual health practices, STIs, tend to be more sort of positive around sexual health, to folks who are abstinence only, right? And so in those two districts can live right next to each other. And so sexual health education can look radically different depending on the district. And so can the curriculum, and so there's this real kind of wide array of what that could look like depending on the politics of the community, depending on the religious background of the community. And so like in Southwest Virginia, it's a lot of outdated stuff, because you have some folks who are working off of a curriculum that was, approved years and years ago. And then you have some people who have stuff that's a lot newer. You have some stuff who it's just the PE teachers just kind of get a mandate, hey, do something, and they create it themselves. So to say what any one district is getting is hard. But in Southwest Virginia, what we were trying to do under Appalachian Replication Project before we lost our funding was get evidence-based programming that would work for that area for middle schoolers. But we found that a lot of folks are either really far behind, and you can have some, I'm almost done. You can have some districts who their sex ed is facilitated by an outside organization, like a university or a health department. Some districts where it's the PE teachers, some districts where it's the nurses, the school nurses. So it's really kind of all over the place.
Patchwork. Yeah.
I do also want to add, in Tennessee, districts are not required to include family life education if their pregnancy or if their teen pregnancy rate falls below a certain number. So.
And they're not allowed to demonstrate condom usage.
Yes. Yeah. Or give out certain information unless students are married.
So yeah. Okay. So one of the things that people suggest is that we should not have sex ed in schools, because then guardians of any faith can educate their kids in a way that is compatible with their beliefs. So 2 questions. What do you think about that either or idea? And then also, does that seem like a workable solution to you? And I'm gonna start, I think it's Brian's turn to start. Sorry. So the question is, if someone says that keeping sex ed out of schools allows guardians of any faith to educate their kids in a way that's compatible with their beliefs. So that's an either or proposition. It's either this option or that option, either sex ed in schools or not sex ed in schools. And then the idea that that's the best way to move forward for sex ed because it makes sure that the education is compatible with folks' beliefs. So what are your thoughts about that?
My child is in public schools, my children. And so I guess I'll be facing that in a few years when they're old enough to start participating in it. And they're probably some of the most diverse schools in this area, this region, because of the industries that are here. We just have, even though it's a rural area, we have 2 big universities and then a lot of manufacturing that draws in refugee resettlement from all over the world. And so I could imagine that there's quite a few responses, quite a few folks who would rather just be in charge of that for their own children. But in terms of what I think as what I would hope for the children that are in my house or in my community, I mean, I want them to have as much exposure as they can to use their own, to trust their own intellect and their own developing faith, their own sense of their relationship with everyone else. Yeah, to be able to make wise and informed choices. So I guess in short, I would advocate for as expansive of an education in a public school setting as possible.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Brian. Tiffany, would you like to go?
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think, well, like Mandy said in the comments, parents aren't gonna do it, you know? So if you, it seems like that's just things that people say who don't want to see sexual education in school. You know, I think it's a cop-out. And I think if you leave it to the parents, there's going to be a lot of people wandering around who haven't been taught anything. You know, I'm an open-minded parent and I have an open-minded kid. And the second I try to talk to my kid about anything related to this, he just freaks out. He's like, Mom, you are the last person I want to hear about this stuff from. And I have a good relationship with my kid, but that is just a boundary for him. And you know, if I was left completely to my own devices, then my kid would be learning everything about sex and sexuality from the internet, and that is a terrifying prospect. So I think this whole idea of leaving it out of schools is a cop-out, and because outside of like my church and Brian's church, I don't think they're really teaching it in schools. And so then the end result is a bunch of kids who know nothing, or they're figuring it out at the church lock-in with disastrous results, you know.
Yeah. Thank you, Tiffany. Okay, Jessie, would you like to weigh in?
Yes. So I'm sorry, can you repeat the actual question again?
Yes. So some people think that keeping sex out of schools would allow guardians of any faith to educate their kids in a way that is compatible with their beliefs. So one is the either or, and the other one is leaving everything up to parents, the effectiveness of leaving everything up to parents.
Okay. I think it's a both and solution. I think that having conversations about sex and sexuality and bodies and relationships from multiple resources is really important, because that helps you conceptualize your own ideas and base them in your own faith and values. And what was the stat that you shared? 93% of parents think that it's important to have sex ed
middle and high school. Yeah.
Yeah.
And
that's because they don't want to do it. They don't want to be responsible for it. It's much easier to be like, ooh, I feel too uncomfortable with this. Like, that should be something that the school does. Just like some people don't feel comfortable doing math and they don't feel qualified to be able to teach their kids how to do algebra. We trust these people, and we also have the power by participating in school boards and being a part of the community to guide the things and make sure that the people who are teaching our kids are qualified to do it. We shouldn't be forcing the PE teacher who hasn't been trained in sex ed to teach kids sex ed, because their discomfort is going to ooze all over that classroom and it's not doing anything to help anyone.
Thank you, Jessie. Caitlin, I saw a couple of comments. Sorry, I was going to say a couple of comments and questions came in.
Yes, I was going to read those before the next question. The first one is from Angie, Johnson County Health Department, Mountain City. Just a quick FYI, that law actually changed in Tennessee and is no longer the case. I believe
So
that one.
the 17.5 girls between 17 and 19. Yeah, it changed I think 2 years ago. Yeah.
Or was it the married
Or was it
student?
the married one?
Well, maybe Angie will confirm. I believe it was the percentage one.
Angie,
Okay.
if you want to confirm. So I'll go on to the next comment. From Mandy, it says the problem with that mentality is that not all parents educate their children on sexual health. And she also said the further issue with this is that it creates a culture where children are all spreading misinformation amongst themselves because they're not given factual information from adults. And then Tiffany said some parents will not speak to their children about sex at all. Also, children do not want to speak with parents about sex.
Right. And one more thing that I would like to add is that honestly, especially in this area, but in most parts of the country, most guardians also did not get effective sex ed. And so we've heard from a lot of them that they just don't feel equipped. They don't feel like they have the knowledge or the confidence to be able to be their kids' primary educators.
Okay, we got two more. Josh said, although I would say that PE/health teachers are supposed to teach health, their background should include being able to teach about their bodies. And then Angie said I was referring to the comment about the FLE only being taught in counties with certain pregnancy rates. That's no longer the case. It's required in all counties, but as you all have mentioned, it's guided by legislative policy. Thank you for the clarification.
And then Brian, you had something else to say?
Sure. I just was thinking of another sort of guiding framework that I have theologically for these kinds of questions, whether it's sex ed in schools or other kinds of teaching in schools about science, other kinds of science, or other kinds of human knowledge and study is our response as faith communities to what is being brought or taught. Is it a response of coming from a place of fear, or is it coming from a place of trust? And I find that I can't maintain a faith with authenticity or with integrity that is primarily focused on fear of my framework being somehow dismantled. That's not the kind of God or theology that it's not the kind of God or creation that I can live by. Rather, it has to be one of trust, one of hope, and one that God is big enough to handle it and to help me handle it. If there's some new information that I didn't have before, God forbid that I learn something new and have to be changed by it. So that's kind of my focus when it comes to those sorts of questions.
Thanks so much, Brian. That's really insightful. So one of the comments that we've heard, and we've heard it from multiple legislators and then also community members, is that sex ed is okay as long as teachers don't promote promiscuity. And Jessie, I wonder if you would start addressing that, since you know what sex ed actually does do.
I'm sorry, I was reading the chat. That sex ed promotes promiscuity.
Sex ed is okay as long as teachers don't promote promiscuity.
Okay. I don't know any teacher that would ever do that. So sex ed is about empowering people to reflect on their own desires and figure out how to communicate them with other people. And that doesn't mean that it has to happen right now, but it's building on that foundation of empowerment of like, and it doesn't even have to be a sexual thing. Like we talk about consent is like pizza, and we talk about how you have to talk about what you want on your pizza before you get really hungry, or you might make a bad decision on impulse. We talk about how there might be things that you've never tried that you're curious about, and you might not like it, but it's your decision if you want to try that or not. And about how to talk about your desires and wants and dislikes, and starting with something less emotional than sex, but making those metaphors is really helpful. So those are tools that you can use in sex ed, and sex ed isn't only about sex. That's the huge thing. And it doesn't, if anything, especially risk avoidance, they're telling you not to do it. But really good sex ed, comprehensive sex ed will just empower people to make the decisions that they want. And honestly, if somebody wants to be promiscuous, it's their own decision, and no one can tell them not to. So, but no one's going to tell them to as well. So,
and is it all right if I add a statistic, Jessie? So there are multiple studies that show that abstinence-only sex ed is approximately as effective as no sex ed at all, and that it can be potentially harmful because it shames people who have had consensual or non-consensual sex, and it disappears folks like LGBTQ folks who are already vulnerable in the community, and especially within schools. And it leads to, and comprehensive sex ed tends to lead to later initiation of sexual activity, fewer partners over the lifetime, because folks feel empowered to say no, or maybe, or yeah, but not now. And less teen pregnancy and less STI transmission among teens and young adults. So there are definitely some benefits to comprehensive sex ed.
Because if you're teaching kids how pregnancy happens and the effects of pregnancy that it has on the body and your relationships and your entire life, I feel like they're going to come up with their own decision that they're not ready to do that. You don't have to tell them not to do it, because telling kids not to do something doesn't always work. But giving them the tools and the power to be like, oof, that seems like a lot, and that's something I'd like to avoid. Oh, and I also have these tools on how to not let that happen. That empowers good decision making for themselves.
Thank you.
It makes it their own idea.
That's very powerful. Thank you, Jessie. Tiffany, would you like to weigh in?
Oh yeah, I mean, I just can't imagine a universe where educating people about sex promotes promiscuity. I was so ready to quote some of those good numbers you had, because I learned those in OWL training. It's amazing to think that if we take the shame away, but we also take like the forbidden ooh out of it, that that people wait longer to have sex. It's demystified, and you're also maybe more aware of the cost, the consequences. It seems to me that this is kind of stock and trade part of some political rhetoric that we see in some places, where it's some of that, it's that fear-based stuff that Brian was talking about earlier. And I don't know who it's serving, because it's certainly not serving our kids.
Thanks. Brian, did you have anything to add?
Sure. I've noticed it, not so much in this particular realm, but in conversations around churches' relative level amount of inclusion or welcome of sexual minorities, that even just the language of a word like promiscuity, or perspectives that are concerned about that, tend to be focused on individual scripture passages, or very kind of micro readings of particular passages, like what we call proof texting, where you like pull a passage out of context and you say the Bible says this. And I was raised to respect the Bible and what it says about all kinds of things. I was also raised, thankfully, or I appreciate that I was also given over time a sense that there's an arc of the story of Scripture that is moving a particular direction. And kind of like I was saying earlier about from fear to hope, it's been a movement from concern about the letter and the jot and tittle of every law to what is God up to with our bodies and our lives. And it's become, for me and those who are part of my community, a message of liberation, of transforming injustices in our society, liberation for us individually and collectively. So I would certainly support what's been said so far for those reasons.
Thank you.
Can I
So-
hop back again too?
Oh, yes, please.
Think about what Brian just said about the word promiscuity. It's so absolute. Like, if you've had 2 sexual partners, are you promiscuous? Like, there's no number. It could be 2 to 100. Like, what is that term? And when we think about things in binaries and absolutes like that, it's like virginity. It's just these concepts that are so negative about people who are enjoying themselves and their bodies. And if they do it too much, they're bad. But yeah, just problematic language.
So I wanted to bring up a thought. I'm not sure the best way to do it, but it has come out because of this discussion. So some people might find some parts of comprehensive sex ed offensive because it is not in line with their religious beliefs. And almost every faith has some version of the golden rule. So how do we justify what we do or do not teach? And how do we center all the kids? And I will let y'all think about that for a second. Ask any clarifying questions you have, and then I'm going to have you volunteer which order to answer in. Go ahead, Jessie.
I think it goes back to what we said before. If sex ed is done really well and you use simple language and broad terms and just think of people as whole people, and we don't get to, even within congregations, they don't get to say how they live their lives outside. Like, everybody is different, and that should be celebrated. And you can craft these curriculum to reflect that. You just have to be mindful about it and think about all types of people.
Thank you. Okay, are either Brian or Tiffany ready to say something?
Well, it's interesting because trying to find a universal baseline when you're trying to make theological statements can be really, really hard. And I'm part of a religion where we try to do that pretty regularly because we're intentionally theologically diverse. And so, like, that's my background, and I'm still struggling to do that in an eloquent way. But I think what you got to get back to is I think that we can all agree maybe that all bodies are sacred gifts, and that all humans are beloved. You know, I won't even say beloved by who, right? Because that would then narrow the focus. But to say that all are beloved, all bodies are sacred gifts, it seems to me like that could be a baseline or a common ground that we could work from. I think also the golden rule does apply. Ideas like compassion is something that is maybe not 100% universal in religion, but it's pretty darn close. And I think the call to compassion is something that there's space for here. So if I was trying to find the common ground, that's probably what I'd look for. And I hope that was me answering the question, because I was trying to follow it.
How about you, Brian?
Sounded to me like you were answering it great, Tiffany. In terms of how we justify what or what not to teach, and centering the kids, the only thing that occurred to me that I would add is a kind of humility and listening to them and their concerns, where they are in life. It's so easy to forget as adults that the concerns of children and youth, their lives, their experiences are real, that they are where they are, and if we don't listen to them and respond to them where they are, then they will find somewhere else to try to learn or process or figure it out. And I think that's one of the reasons that the church has become less and less of a safe space, and is shrinking in a lot of the country, because surveys have shown that people tend to think of words like hypocritical or restrictive when they think of their local church, as opposed to a place where they can learn and grow. And I know that's not true across the board, but so that listening and that humility seems like an important part of centering them. And I also just recognize that so far we seem to be on a similar pages here, even though there's some diversity between us theologically. We live in much more theologically diverse communities, all of us, and need to be having these conversations. But I think having them as adults in safe ways like this, with ground rules, and not having the kids feel like they're there between the parents, like that picture of Annie in the movie, I don't know, getting pulled from one direction to another, that they're not being lost in it, in the debates and that sort of thing.
Excellent. Thank you. Caitlin, do we have any other comments or questions in the chat that we need to share?
No, they were just comments. Ryan said, thanks for the conversation. I got to head out now. Take care. And Tammy said, great to hear all views. Thanks so much for this discussion. So
Much. My last official question is, there's a lot of talk right now about parents' rights, and then also about state responsibility. And I wondered how that plays with student rights in the context of your faith. Just a little question. And you all can, Tiffany and Brian, you can race to the mic.
I will dive right into that one. I'm a parent, right? And I want what's best for my kid. And sometimes I think I know what's best for my kid, and the schools might disagree. For example, the schools think they should be teaching my kid Bible in history class and calling it history, you know, and I might disagree with them about that. And yet they're doing it, and no one's worried about parents' rights in that conversation. I think about specifically around students' rights around being outed by teachers or administrators if they're LGBTQ. And I think about how decisions like that to out children to their parents are literally killing those kids. And I think that in a situation where you can't make everyone happy, that the choice should be to save kids' lives. And so, and it is my faith that informs that. But I'm mostly speaking as a parent this time.
Thank you. Brian?
Yeah, I don't think I have anything to add. Appreciate that.
You. So do any of the three of you, and I'm going to include Josh because I threw him under the bus twice so far, and so I think he should have an opportunity also. Do any of the four of you have any other questions that you want to bring up or topics that you want to discuss before we open it to the group? Okay. So, Josh, would you mind making it so that people can unmute themselves if they choose to? Thank you. So I'm going to invite folks. We have some time. We can leave early. Nobody ever is mad about leaving early. But feel free to come off mute and share a perspective, ask a question. It could be controversial. It could be, you know, preaching to the choir, whatever moves you. Feel free to hop in. And feel free to unmute and thank our panelists as well.
If I could ask a question.
Please
So thank you. So I don't know if I'm in a little bit of a different space because I am in higher education, but I do work with a faith affiliated institution, and my role is with Title IX. And so we are currently navigating this disjunction between what the education department is saying we can do and what the Tennessee Attorney Generals and our injunctions say we can't do. And so I'm thankful, number one, that you all are doing this because it's important, I think, for me to understand and be cognizant of the fact that I work in a realm that is faith-based, and there are certain perspectives that are held to. But I'm just curious if you all have any suggestions about how to even engage in that dialogue to ensure that at the end of the day, it's the right thing to protect students, regardless of who they are, how they identify, how they present. Because I feel that golden rule perspective carries a little bit more weight in this conversation, but that's my perspective. So if you all have any tips or tricks or suggestions on how to engage in that conversation, even if I never change their mind, just how to even approach the conversation would be helpful.
Thank you, Michaela.
I want to clarify, who are you trying to be in dialogue with?
With administration, with the board, with those who are going to weigh in on these policy decisions. And I mean, I'm pretty sure, hopefully you can read between the lines. Obviously, I want to do what's best for our faculty, our staff, our students, for our visitors, our guests, for everybody. That is not a shared perspective.
And Title IX, Michaela, can you share briefly in case everybody doesn't know what that entails?
Absolutely. So Title IX is a piece of federal legislation that was part of the Education Amendments in 1972. And it was designed to bridge the gap and bring equity and access to all forms of education, whether that's sports, athletics, financial aid, course offerings. And it's expanded over the years to include preventing sexual harassment, sex-based discrimination, including dating violence, domestic violence, stalking, sexual assault, our VAWA, violence against women offenses, and sexual exploitation. So things like sexting, voyeurism, outing somebody. And so currently, the education department has said sexual orientation, gender identity is protected under Title IX, and that's where the proposed regs are going. But the Tennessee Attorney General, and I think it's 25 other states, had filed an injunction. So I cannot use Title IX to investigate harassment on the basis of sexual identity or gender identity or sexual orientation, even though technically I can. And so there's this navigation of federal versus states' rights, and it's a much broader conversation, but it is a federal law. And since we receive federal money, we have to follow it. Otherwise, we give up that money.
I'd just like to say thank you. And I'm so sorry that you're stuck between this rock and a hard place, because that is a really difficult situation to be in.
And I'm having conversations with people in and outside of Title IX, trying to figure out, and I'm a criminal justice professor. And so there's a part of me that somebody mentioned earlier, hypocritical, the word hypocritical. There's a part of me that feels hypocritical to stand in front of my students and say, hey, we have this thing called equal protection and due process. But then I'm responsible for overseeing a policy that is decidedly not doing that. But I also don't want to step down from that perspective, because I know the institute, or from that position, because I know the institution doesn't have anyone else prepared for that role. And that feels like the bigger disservice. So.
Anybody have any insight to share?
That is very heavy. I think having conversations like these is about finding your shared values. So we all want to keep our kids safe, right? We can all agree with that, and being able to build on that agreement can help. And then it's like, how do we do that? Oh, well, here's what research says. And having these conversations and normalizing conversations like this can help. And education can help, because the more you know, the better decisions you make.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thanks.
Does anyone else have any advice?
You go ahead, Josh.
Or
Yeah,
Brian?
so you're saying like your board of visitors and your administration wants to support the attorney general in Tennessee, and it's generally at odds with what the actual federal policy is?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I was just trying to understand that better. I mean, I tend to come from an organizing perspective, thus the coalition, meaning I try to figure out like who are my people, first of all. And it sounds like they have to follow the rules in terms of the legality of it. So, I guess technically somebody could potentially sue a student who did not get the service that they could based off of the federal law. And so, I mean, I always tend to go where like, who are my people and where are they and how can I start a conversation? So there's not a paid Title IX coordinator. So you're both the Title IX coordinator and also a professor?
I do receive a very small stipend for it. So I'm a full-time program coordinator for our program and professor, in addition to full-time Title IX coordinator.
Yeah. Yeah, it sounds like you're looking for your folks and that are in that space. And so even if it's small, I would not to just be to not engage. I'm not saying disengage from other people, but I would be curious of like who your people are, But then again, if you take an organized press meeting, you're trying to build power and you're trying to build both legal and like community power with students and with parents and with other professors and other people, that comes with its own risks. So I think sort of knowing what the risks are for you when you start doing that work, whether it's get fired potentially or not. I'm not saying it's going to happen. I don't know the context, but I think kind of understanding what risks you're willing to take in the context that you're in, and then finding the community of people who can support you around that, and then building out some kind of way to get there. And but I don't think there are obviously any easy answers. And usually when that's the case, I just think like, who are the people that I can lean into that unknown with, who I could at least build a community of support around me, so that when we do have to make particular choices, like maybe looking for other legal representation, et cetera, that you're building a community around the work that you're trying to do, which can be, potentially, I say dangerous, at least threatening to you professionally or beyond that, because it sounds like that is a space to be in. But there might be an ally on an ally on the board of visitors, if that's the language I'll use, or an administration who is close to the issue, that could I don't know, give you some insight. But it sounds like you're kind of slowly in that process, and that it's takes courage,
Yeah. And as you were saying that, I mean, if it risks my professional career, I can't think of a better reason to get fired than for doing the right thing, so.
Thank you, Michaela.
Mm.
Did you have something to add, Tiffany?
Michaela, did you say you're working in a faith-based higher education institution?
Yes.
Okay, so because like the legal and the organizing is beyond me. In fact, I wish I had been taking notes when Josh was speaking. But I do have a little thought in speaking with administration, and it kind of goes back to what everyone's been saying this whole time in one way or another. And that's finding that common ground, and assuming most faith-based higher education institutions in this area are Christian. I think it's okay to ask these people what they think God's love is calling them to do. I mean, it's a simple question. It's gonna annoy them. And but I don't think they're being asked that enough. You would think that leaders of religious institutions would be asked that, or that they would be asking themselves that, but they are generally not. So, do what Josh said, but if the universe provides you with the opportunity, you might want to ask that annoying little question that I think Jesus would have asked them too.
I
Which
love
can also be a dangerous question.
Yeah.
Well,
Okay.
we know what happened to Jesus,
Thank you so much, Michaela. I hope that was helpful.
It was. Thank you.
And I know you're local, so reach out if you need just to re-enter chat.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Or need someone to go to a meeting with you.
Yes.
I would love that.
All right. I was going to ask Caitlin, is there anything in the chat that we need to share?
No, most of them were just thanking the panelists' perspectives and how informative the discussion was.
Excellent. Thank you so much. I'm going to say, unless somebody else unmutes and jumps on real quick, that I'm going to go ahead and say thank you to the panelists who joined us. Thank you to Josh for letting me throw him under the bus. Thank you to Caitlin for managing all of our tech for us. And our meeting next time will be at a different online location because ARP doesn't exist anymore. So we're working on that right now. If you are not on our mailing list, please drop your email in the chat and we will capture that and add you to the mailing list so that you get a notice of when and where the next meeting is. There's a strategic planning meeting coming up sometime in September. And Caitlin and I will be in touch about that. If you have a driving desire to be part of strategic planning, please feel free to attend. If you are interested in helping plan next year's shOUT Summit, I think I have space and perhaps some money so that we can do that next year. And so we'll have a small team working on that, the strategic planning team, and then the planning team for our upcoming roundtables. If you're interested in any of those, please drop that in the chat because we would love to get y'all involved. Thank you, everyone.
Oh, and the next all shOUT coalition meeting is in October, right? You're still on mute.
We're not sure, but we will send out an email with all the information after we meet with the strategic planning crew in September. All right. Excellent. Thank you all. Josh, if you could stay, and Caitlin, if you could stay, we can do all our tech stuff afterwards. That would be great. Thanks so much. Bye, everybody.
Bye, y'all. Thanks for being here.